Imagine walking into work every single day knowing that just a few feet away from you is a man-made storm of liquid metal hot enough to instantly evaporate human bone. You step onto the floor of a steel mill, and immediately the air itself feels heavy, thick, and violently oppressive. The ambient temperature around the furnace can easily exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, but that is absolutely nothing compared to the belly of the beast. Inside the electric arc furnace, the temperature reaches a staggering 2,732 degrees Fahrenheit. That is 1,500 degrees Celsius. At this extreme heat, the air physically distorts, bending light and creating a chaotic mirage. The sound is completely deafening, a constant roaring thunder of raw electrical power tearing through tons of scrap metal. And right there, standing literally on the edge of this manufactured hell, are the steel workers. In this environment, one wrong step, one minor miscalculation, does not result in a simple reprimand or a meeting with human resources. It results in instant lethal tragedy. We are going to reveal the unspoken protocols of survival, the irreversible biological cost of this extreme environment, and what actually happens to the human mind when you spend 12 hours a day dancing with liquid fire. But before we pull back the curtain on this brutal reality, if you are enjoying our channel, subscribe and turn on the little bell so you don't miss any content. It helps us a lot, and it's free. To even survive the first hour on the floor, these men and women must wear highly specialized protective gear. The most iconic piece is the silver aluminized suit. It looks like something straight out of a deep space exploration mission, and its core purpose is simple but vital: to reflect the intense radiant heat away from the fragile human body. Without it, your skin would begin to violently blister and peel even if you were standing several yards away from the molten tap. But there is a dark, agonizing paradox to this shiny silver armor. While it successfully protects you from the merciless radiation of the furnace, it traps everything else inside. It essentially becomes a personal, wearable greenhouse. As you work, hauling heavy chains, maneuvering massive oxygen lances, and fighting the heavy machinery, your core body temperature drastically spikes. The suit reflects the external heat, but it simultaneously reflects your own body heat directly back at you. You are, quite literally, cooking from the inside out. Within mere minutes of starting a task, you are completely drenched. The biological toll of this is staggering. A steel worker can easily sweat out up to 2 gallons of water in a single 12-hour shift. That is nearly 8 liters of fluid violently extracted from your body just to keep your internal organs from shutting down entirely. This massive fluid loss leads to a chronic state of what industry insiders call the heat hangover. It is a bone-deep, relentless exhaustion that no amount of weekend sleep ever seems to fully cure. You will see these workers constantly, compulsively drinking water and electrolyte mixtures. It is not about simply quenching a dry throat. It is a strict mathematical equation of survival to prevent a sudden, catastrophic physical collapse on the floor. And yet, as brutal as the heat and the extreme physical exhaustion are, they are only the visible enemies. They are the threats you can feel and anticipate. There is a silent, almost invisible threat lurking on the mill floor that outsiders never even consider. An enemy so incredibly small and seemingly harmless, you would never even notice it in your everyday life. But in a steel mill, the rules of physics are pushed to their absolute limits. And what happens when this tiny, overlooked element comes into contact with 200 tons of boiling, molten steel is something you have to hear to believe. You might think the greatest danger in a steel mill is the fiery liquid metal itself. But talk to any veteran on the floor, and they will tell you the real nightmare is something you drink every day: water. In the outside world, water extinguishes fire. Inside a steel mill, water is a bomb. When a single drop of liquid water comes into contact with molten steel, it does not simply boil away. It undergoes a violent phase change, flashing instantly into superheated steam. In a fraction of a second, that tiny drop expands to 1,600 times its original volume. Now, imagine a small puddle of condensation from a leaking pipe, or even a heavy drop of sweat falling from a worker's brow, getting trapped beneath the surface of the molten bath. The sudden, massive expansion creates a volumetric explosion so powerful it can tear the heavy steel roof right off the furnace, sending a tidal wave of liquid fire across the entire bay. It is a catastrophic event that leaves zero room for escape. This ever-present threat of a steam explosion completely changes the psychological dynamic of the job. Every movement must be calculated. Every piece of scrap metal loaded into the furnace must be bone dry. To manage this beast, you have workers like the tapper. The tapper's job is to physically open the furnace tap hole so the freshly cooked steel can flow out. To do this, they do not push a button from a safe distance. They step right up to the roaring opening, wielding a heavy, consumable steel pipe called an oxygen lance. They blast pure oxygen into the tap hole to burn away the hardened slag, standing in a localized blizzard of white-hot sparks that slowly melt the outer layers of their protective helmets. They are quite literally wrestling a localized volcano, trusting their gear and their instincts to not be consumed by the blast. Faced with an environment where a single drop of your own sweat or a moment of hesitation can literally trigger a thermal bomb, how long do you think your nerves would hold up under the pressure? Leave me your opinion in the comments, because the psychological shift that happens to these workers as the shift drags on is what truly separates the veterans from the casualties. The physical heat is brutal, but the true, silent killer on the mill floor is the psychological decay. As the graveyard shift pushes into its 10th hour, a terrifying biological reality sets in. The human body is completely depleted of electrolytes. The physical exhaustion is so deep it penetrates the bone. This is the exact moment when the mind instinctively tries to shut down, to dissociate from the pain and the noise. But this is also the exact moment when absolute razor-sharp focus is demanded. Above the furnace floor, shrouded in thick smoke and heat haze, sits the crane operator. They are maneuvering a massive swinging ladle containing over 100 tons of sloshing liquid steel, and they are moving it directly over the heads of their crew on the ground. At this stage of exhaustion, verbal communication is useless. The ambient noise level constantly hovers around 120 decibels, comparable to standing on the tarmac next to a roaring jet engine. Instead, survival relies entirely on a dark, unspoken brotherhood. It is a grim choreography of subtle hand signals, head nods, and intense eye contact through shaded visors. If the crane operator misjudges a swing by a few inches due to mental fatigue, or if the rigger on the ground hesitates for a fraction of a second, the molten steel spills. And in this environment, a spill means the crew does not go home, ever. The bond between these workers is not forged in corporate team-building exercises. It is forged in the absolute terrifying certainty that their lives are entirely in each other's hands. But as grueling as this daily survival test is, the most unsettling part of this story isn't what happens inside the factory walls. It's the invisible connection this brutal environment has to your everyday life. And what we are about to reveal changes the way you look at the modern world forever. Every time you drive your car across a suspension bridge, every time you take an elevator to the top floor of a gleaming glass and steel skyscraper, or even when you simply turn the key in your ignition, you are interacting with a material born from this exact brutal environment. The modern world is built entirely on a massive, unyielding foundation of steel. But what no corporate brochure or engineering textbook ever tells you is that this infrastructure is heavily subsidized by the physical and mental limits of the men and women working in those mills. They trade their hearing to the deafening roar of the arc furnaces. They trade their joint health to the relentless vibrations of heavy machinery. And they often trade years of their natural life expectancy to forge the very skeleton of our civilization. The pristine, polished, and perfectly engineered metal we see in our modern cities completely hides the dirty, chaotic, and unimaginably dangerous reality of its creation. The next time you look at a towering steel structure, do not just see the engineering marvel. Look deeper. See the sweat evaporating into steam before it even hits the floor. See the grueling 10-hour shifts inside a wearable aluminized oven. See the silent, uncompromising brotherhood operating in the dark shadows of liquid fire. Because until automation completely takes over the deepest, most dangerous depths of the heavy manufacturing industry, fragile human bodies will continue to be the primary shock absorbers for the relentless progress of the modern world. If you found this raw dive into the reality of steelworkers eye-opening, do not just scroll away and move on to the next distraction. Subscribe, leave a like, and stay curious. Question the hidden origins of the manufactured world around you, and I will see you in our next deep dive investigation.